When everything began with COVID a few months ago, one of the things that was mentioned in several of the professional meetings that I participated in was that recruiters are going to be very interested in how students are or applicants are not just surviving, but in some way thriving or showing resilience through their experience here. And so that was the genesis of me thinking about how we could have a discussion about that. My name's Brian Hirsch, and I am the lead person for the Career Center based in the UNT College of Business. We have a full-time staff of 4 people, and we can kind of show you how to get in touch with us near the end of the presentation. I have a co-presenter today, Kathy Western, who is a professional human resources uh, person and who has done a lot of recruiting. And Kathy, I'll let you introduce yourself to everyone.
Right. Hi, everybody. So I'm very excited to be here. And hopefully today we're going to be able to share some things that we've learned over several years that might help in a job search, particularly in a virtual world. I mean, it is becoming a very different world in that sense. So hopefully we're going to be able to, as Brian stated, I have 26 years of experience in HR. And recently made the decision to transition to academia. So I will be a lecturer at UNT, joining the UNT family in the fall. So I'm very excited about that. But with that, turn it back over to Brian.
All right. The just yesterday, the North Texan, the summer issue came out, or at least they sent out something on social media, and they actually had an article on thriving through adversity, where they had talked to several current students, recent graduates, and some faculty members about what they were doing throughout this process. And just yesterday, I heard a great story that came from one of my very best friends, whose daughter is a pre-med student at another university. She's a biochemistry major. And in her very first biochem class, and you'd think if you were majoring in something, that's a pretty important class. On her first exam, she made a 34. And she went to the professor, and the professor was very nice, but he basically laid things out for her. He said, no one who has ever scored lower than a 40 on my first exam has ever passed this class. My advice to you would be to drop the class and also really consider changing your major. She was pretty upset. She called her dad. Her dad said, how much do you want this? She said, I really want it. The long story short is she ended up making a B in the course. And the professor wrote her a beautiful letter of recommendation to get into medical school. That's an example of grit. It's an example of resilience. Today, we want to talk about how grit is defined, how it sort of fits in with the job search, how are some tips on job searching in this virtual world that requires us to do some different things or operate maybe a little bit differently than we have before in the past. We'll also talk about some resources that we have in the Career Center. So what is grit? According to Angela Duckworth, who is the person who first published and wrote about this when she was a graduate student working on her PhD, grit is passion and sustained persistence applied toward long-term achievement with no particular concern for rewards or recognition along the way. And there are some really key components of this. One of the things is it's a long-term thing. The second thing is that it's not about every little thing that you do, but it's about the big things that we undertake throughout our lives. Because what she was able to show is that people's that if they really understood what it was that that they were trying to accomplish, if they were really dedicated to that, then they were much more likely to be successful. And this is where she discovered this idea of purpose, the importance of purpose. And so there's this parable of the three bricklayers. Somebody comes along and talks to these people that are, you know, laying bricks. And when they're asked, they are, what are you doing? The first bricklayer replies, I'm laying bricks. The second bricklayer was asked the same question. He answered, I'm putting up a wall. The third bricklayer, when asked the question, what are you doing, responded with pride in his voice, I'm building a cathedral. And this is what she discovered when we start talking about, you know, the big things that we're interested in accomplishing in life. If we're thinking about it as the third layer was, this is the place where most people put in the effort and are able to stick with it through the end, even through adversity. When Dr. Duckworth was sitting down with her graduate advisor said, you do not have a theory. They said, because there's no formula that goes with it. And so eventually she arrived at this formula that she calls effort counts twice. And there's two parts to being successful with purpose. The first one is talent. You know, do we have some innate abilities to accomplish something? But here's the thing about that, is just talent alone doesn't get you pretty much anywhere. There has to be effort involved in it. And what she said was talent times effort is equal to skill. And then applying those skills with effort is where the achievement comes in. And I think if you talk to anybody who is successful in business, they would tell you this story in some way, shape, or form, right? They're hiring for skills, but ultimately they know that unless the person is willing to put the effort into it, then they're not going to achieve to the level that either the place that they're working for wants them to achieve or the individual wants to achieve. So these are some things to just bear in mind. So just kind of bringing this home now, what does your response to the current situation prove to employers? Could you, at a job interview, or could you, in a networking situation, talk about at least one thing that you've done or one example that you could show that would help them to understand, and it's over on the right-hand side here, that you adapted, built, repurposed, responded, changed, learned during this time period. And I think ultimately, when the employers are feeding back to us, they want to hear that message from candidates. Okay, these are some of the ways that you can describe or provide examples. And we'll talk more about that. How, you know, we'll show you a methodology for doing that as we go forward. One of our most favorite guest speakers in the College of Business, in the Ryan College of Business, is Tony Bridwell. Tony is the senior, he's actually, he calls himself the Chief People Officer for Ryan LLC. Ryan LLC, Ryan College of Business, this is the same company, right? In life, you will face circumstances personally, professionally, and organizationally. You can be a victim or a victor. The choice is yours. And I've talked to a lot of my, co-professors and co-advisors, and one of the things that is happening to some degree or another is with some students, not with all, but there's a group of students, and when they say, you know, what's going on? Why aren't you doing what you're supposed to be doing here? They're saying COVID. And so, unfortunately, when you go into a situation where you're being paid to have a deliverable, that's not going to be the best way to answer a question if you're not having the deliverable, or not delivering the deliverable, as it were. So again, very important that we're able to talk about what it is that we're doing to improve ourselves even during a challenging time. All right. Now, there actually is something called the grit gauge or the grit scale. These are two links that will get you to it. The second one is actually available to you through your ePortfolio. And if you've never been in that, it's on your My UNT page. When you log in there, I think there's one block on there that says ePortfolio. And when you go into it, this little icon right here takes you to a number of different sort of self-discovery and other exercises. And one of the things in there is take the grit gauge. So you're able to actually score yourself specifically on grit. And here's one of the really, really cool things about grit that I think is so absolutely critical, and that Angela Duckworth talks about a lot. It's not static. You can get better at grit. And so just because you take it once and maybe it's not showing you to be very gritty, or maybe it's showing that you need to work on one area versus another one, you can do that. And clearly people are able to change over a period of time. So that's another one of the things that is so positive about grit and resiliency. It's not fixed, but we can get better at it as time goes on. All right. Kathy, is this you or me?
No, this is me. Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Kathy now, and she's going to talk to you a little bit more about the job searching and goal setting.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Brian. As Brian said, grit is such an exciting way to look at things. And one of the comments that he made was really, it's all in how we're looking at the new world, right? We can be a victor or a victim, right? But I think that this group of people who is in a job search right now is in such a unique position to be able to understand and practice many different ways of looking at it. Whereas if you were searching 2 years ago, all you knew was look at LinkedIn, you know, the same thing over and over and over again. And then you'd be calling to in-person interviews. But now you get to practice the virtual world. So I commend you, one, because I know it's tricky making such a transition so fast, but it's all in the art. I mean, you're going to be able to pick it up very easily. So today I wanted to give you a few tips on that job search. In the chat, I put a document out there, which is actually a document that Brian and I created for you. That's a job search checklist. And it provides links. It provides just a list of steps that you should go through. And some of those may be obvious to you, like updating your resume. But if you've done it, check it and move on. But there are some tips in there, for instance, creating an elevator speech. Some of those things you'll go through, and just check out some of those websites because they're pretty unique in some of their tips that they're giving you on how to do each one of those steps. But before we jump into that, I wanted to just reiterate a little bit about grit and the job search. So as you know, grit is really about the resilience, the perseverance, the go-getting kind of attitude, go-getter kind of attitude. But you have to have a direction. You can be that person, but if you don't have a direction, you're going to go 20 different ways. So what you want to do is you want to create a goal hierarchy. And let's just take a doctor, for example. If you are wanting to get into the profession of a doctor, your top level goal, which is that one that's written in ink, I, for my life, want to give back to communities in need and help them understand and help them through their health crisis. Their mid-level goal might be, and that supports your overarching goal, your mid-level goal might be, in order to do that, I need to become a doctor or a nurse, or my career path needs to direct me to that. But then your lower level goals, now those are the ones that are pretty fluid, they can be written in pencil, those are the action items. Those are the ones that are, in order to do that, I must go get my doctorate. I must get involved in associations. I must, all of these different action items. And those things will change over time, and that's okay. Okay, feel good about that. But the most important thing is that you stick to your overarching goal, no matter what. That's the grit part. And you are going to hit bumps in the road, guaranteed. You're going to hit bumps in the road, but you see those as opportunities, not failures. Okay, and you keep going. Next slide, please, Brian. Okay, so how do we do that? Job searching in a virtual world starts with branding. And again, if you have that document in front of you and you want to open it, I'm going to follow right through it. I'm just going to hit some high points, but you may want to follow through and make sure that you kind of understand each one of these components as I talk about them. But as I said, some of these may be obvious, but when you create your brand, you want to update your resume. You are going to be asked to turn on a dime. If a job opening occurs, you want to be sure to be able to just send that updated resume versus, oh, wait, I'm going to need a couple days to update it. You need to make sure that that resume stays updated all the time. You want to create that cover letter that is unique and specific to that position that you're interested in. Don't send them the one from 2 years ago that had totally different information in it. Make sure that you reread your cover letter before you send that one out, and make sure it does apply. Your elevator speech now looks slightly different. You're probably not going to meet many people in the elevator these days, right? Or are not supposed to. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that same elevator speech that you created verbally, and we're going to make sure that we can type that out. So when somebody says, what do you do? Tell me a little bit about you. That 30-second to 1 minute kind of conversation should be written down and sent to them. But every time, my biggest trick I can ever emphasize is really for your elevator speech, practice it on your friends and family. You want to be so confident that in the middle of the night, if you were woken up and said, okay, give me your elevator speech, you'd be able to do it. It's got to be so innate and so practical for you to just spew that. So make sure you do practice that. Goes without saying, a professional photo is extremely important these days, because many times that's going to be the first and maybe only impression that an employer has of you. Employers these days are really just hiring from a Zoom call or a LinkedIn profile or whatever. They don't see the applicant or the candidate until they've started, right? Or maybe I know people who have been just hired with Fidelity who really never went in. They did their onboarding and everything, and they're not going in until 2021. So that could happen. So let's make sure your professional image is ready and is set for you in your social media sites. Take the time now. Everybody's got time now to get your references. Talk to that person that you used to work with, right? And say, would you mind writing down a reference for me, or giving me a personal reference letter? Because there are many employers that are asking for that as well. And if you have that at hand, again, you're going to be differentiated from the rest of the people who are scrambling for that information. You'll just have it in your file. They can also, by the way, reference you on LinkedIn. There's a reference or recommendation piece on LinkedIn, and that's an easy one. Just send them a note and ask them to provide a reference on LinkedIn. Establish your job search network, and that means figure out where you really want to focus your energy. Do you want it to be on LinkedIn, Glassdoor? Is there a specific company that you really want to target, and make sure that you spend a lot of energy trying to network and trying to get into that specific company? Make sure that's part of your job search network. And create a professional email signature. Don't just put the old, Kathy Western. Put your Kathy Western, my mobile number, my LinkedIn website address, and then my email address, because you want them to be able to find you quickly. Again, you want to differentiate yourself and bubble yourself up on top of all your competitors right now. obtaining business cards, that might be kind of a plan B because we don't know when we're going to be able to pass those out right now. But make sure you do have those ready because my hope is that next week we're able to do that and get back in. But unfortunately, just make sure you have some business cards in the event you need those. And then most importantly on this and your branding is review your social sites. And we can't emphasize it enough because as a former employer, we looked at social sites. So if, your parties and your, kind of some of the pictures out there are a little bit tricky, make sure you review all your social sites, Google yourself, you've heard it before, Google yourself and see what comes up. Clean it up because I will tell you, especially now that they can't meet you in person, they're going to rely on social media. So let's make sure it's clean and it presents or represents you well. Next slide, please, Brian. Okay, the interview. As I said, the interview is going to look slightly different now, right? But you are in a unique position to understand and practice both. There are some employers right now that are holding in-person interviews. Believe it or not, they are. So you want to practice for both. But the virtual interview right now will primarily be that one. And what you want to do is you want to make sure your technology is up to par. Don't run into, I'm in the middle of my interview and I didn't charge my computer and all of a sudden I go black on the interview, right? That would be horrible. So make sure you're charged up, you have practiced. Again, have a Zoom call with some friends and family and say, can you hear me when I talk? Or do I need to talk louder? Or my background, does it have my laundry in the background with kids running around or whatever? If you have that, that's okay, because we all, that's life. But virtual backgrounds, Zoom has a virtual background. Put it up if you have the laundry in the background. Okay, just make sure, again, you have a chance.
And Kathy,
Yes.
I suggest, if at all possible, you avoid using your phone to do these, because what ends up happening is usually you're shaking because of the way you're holding up your phone or whatever. And it's just not the best technology to be using for this, part of your job search, because it's such a critical piece of it. So and also probably not while you're driving in the car and stuff like that, and there's a lot of background noise. I mean, there are things that people do and I've interviewed them, and it's just, I'm wondering, do they understand how distracting things are, and I'm not paying attention really to what they're saying.
I agree. And that's a really good point, Brian, because basically as an employer, what you see when you have all the distractions, and to your point, you're taking a call in a car, it means I'm not important as the employer, that this didn't make your radar, right? So what you want to do is you want to make sure that they understand this is important to you, right? That you have set this time aside and you appreciate their time as well. And those are really good points. Again, practice, I can't say it enough. Practice is just it. To your point, Brian, when you're holding a phone and you're shaking because you're so nervous, it's because you don't have the confidence, right? And you're nervous about, every one of us is going to be nervous. But if you can avoid all those different things and just put yourself into practicing it, and have your friends ask you some questions and ask them, what did you learn from this interview? What did you learn about me? Did I represent that I want a job in X, right? But again, the environment, the appearance, don't think that now I can show up in, sweats to these Zoom calls either, right? You definitely, and I know you can basically kind of fool everybody by just dressing from the ground up or from your waist up. And that's probably what many, many people do. And that probably will be okay. But what I would say is if you completely dress up, you have a different feel when you're there. And you feel like you're professional. It's just it's part of that confidence level and that kind of that grit, I guess, as we're talking about. So then in-person interviews, we know about that. In preparedness on the in-person interview looks like making sure you come with extra resumes. A lot of times you'll walk in, the employer said, oh, I thought Sue was going to give me that resume and she didn't, so I don't have a copy. Can you just, So coming with 4 or 5 different copies of your resume is very helpful, along with a portfolio for taking notes. Again, it shows the employer that you care. Okay, next slide, Brian, please. Okay, so employers these days use behavioral interviewing quite often. In fact, I would probably bet you that 99.9% of them now use behavioral interviews. And many of you may not know what a behavioral interview is. And what that does is it's a behavioral based question process that, because employers can predict your future behavior by your past behavior, they're going to ask a question about how you handled a situation in the past. So an example might be, if you're going for a customer service type job, they may say, tell me about a time in your past where you handled a customer service issue that escalated. How did you work through that? Tell me the situation. How did you work through that? And then what was the outcome? Now, those type of questions are probably the hardest to prepare for, because you don't know what kind of question they're going to ask you. But what I would say is it always helps to start thinking about specific situations that you can recall in your career that had to do with a job like you're interviewing for, if that makes sense. So if you're going for a customer service and you've worked at, let's say, Taco Bell or whatever, or a call center, think of those kind of questions. How did I work together as a team? How did that customer situation, how did I de-escalate that? How did I handle a leader who didn't appreciate me? How did I get around that? Because they want to know how you deal with teams, how you deal with your leaders, how you handle customers. So the STAR method that you see in front of you right now is probably one of the most valuable tools you'll ever have. And what I would do if it were me is I would copy this, have it in front of me, and practice it over and over again with questions. Because what it does is that interviewer asks you that question. One, you prepare. You take about 10 seconds to formulate, unless you can come up with it quickly. I award you for that. But if you can't, take about 10 seconds, that's fine. They know it's going to take you a little bit of time. But what you want to do is you don't want to drone on and on and on about, an answer. You want to get to the point, and that's using the STAR method. So you think of your situation, you give them a recap of what that situation was. Describe the problem? What were the challenges? This customer, was, very upset that, she couldn't pay her bill or whatever it was, right? What action did you take? What did you do? And that would be the action. And then the results. What was the outcome? By following that STAR method, you're going to be responding to that behavioral question directly. And a lot of times I can just recall so many different situations by people not using the STAR method. They would go off on a tangent and never really answer the question. This happened several times. And then the interviewer is going to try to come back around and try to recap it, and it's not going anywhere. So then the interviewer becomes a little frustrated. So I definitely, and I'll be, another tip is, out on the internet, there are so many. If you Google behavioral question samples or examples, go through them. There's so many of them. Just go right through them, use the STAR method, and just practice it. Would be my advice to you. Anything else on that, Brian? I see you nodding your head.
No, I think that's great. I just think that the in general, the biggest mistake that people make in the whole career planning, job searching process is lack of preparation and research, and that really comes through especially in an interview. If you haven't prepared, if you haven't thought about it, if you haven't gone and looked up those questions and thought about how would I answer that question, if it came up beforehand. And the flip side of that is that if you have done your preparation and your homework, it shows, and it puts you. It's a serious differentiator between most of the people who are interview, who they're just going to try to wing it.
That's exactly right. In fact, another tip is you will wow the interviewer and you will wow the hiring manager if you know recent events. So if you Google the company before you go in or have this interview and just say, what is the recent events, recent news? Um, in a course that I was taking in the spring, there were several people interviewing, and that was a tip that we gave them. And they came back every time, and they'd come back and say, "Wow, they didn't realize I knew about X, whatever that was. That Fidelity had just acquired something or whatever." And they're like, "Wow, that just happened like yesterday." And so people are very impressed that, to your point, Brian, that you have done your homework and that you come in educated, and you again differentiate yourself above your competitors.
Yeah. Although I wouldn't ask them questions about, oh, I read that you're being sued.
Oh gosh, no. No, let's keep it light and positive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question. During
Okay.
during the preparation and organization, the 5 to 8 minutes, would you suggest restating or repeating the question?
I always think that's a great idea, just to make sure that you're both on the same page, right? And that you're not perceiving, or that they're asking a different type of question. I would certainly repeat it. That's a great idea. Okay. So next, it's building your professional network. And that is, I can't say it enough either, is that mentors are extremely important, especially in a job searching type of situation. For many years, when early in my career, I thought, I got this, right? But I will tell you, probably took me about 5 years before I said, I don't got this as well as I should, right? And I ended up reaching out to people that were either in HR a very long time that I wanted to kind of glean information from, or I wanted a skill that they had. I wanted that charisma, or I wanted something that they had. I loved their guest speaking style, whatever. And I would ask them, it's as simple as, I am working on X. Would you be interested in mentoring me through that? And we can meet on a monthly basis for lunch, and I can bounce some ideas off of you, whatever that looks like. I currently have 2 mentors, because again, a transition into academia is a very different world. So it's very helpful. And I will tell you 100%, you will not get a person say no on that. They want to help you grow and develop. And, mentors are key to any professional and personal relationship. Networking virtually. Don't think Brian's earlier point is valid. Don't blame COVID. COVID is, yes, all of us want to blame it. It's not a great thing, but I will tell you, networking virtually can occur as well. Reaching out and understanding, I want to work for Pepsi. Now, who in my network works for Pepsi or is close to that? Maybe I should reach out to them, who will put me in touch with them, who will put me in touch with it. Whatever that is, start your networking virtually and keep it going. Because if you let it die, everybody's racing right past you, because everybody's going to do it anyway. We talked about targeting desired companies. And if in fact, now this has worked for several people, including myself, that if you in fact are seeing in your job search that you're a little stagnant, there are several companies that hire temporary workers through Kelly Services, through Randstad, through whatever. And these employees get their foot in the door, then they feel the company out. So now it's kind of like a trial basis. And they are also one step ahead of trying to get a full-time position in that company, because now the company has seen them work. So that is an alternative not to put aside, to be very interested in if you in fact feel that may be an option for you. And then on step 4, create your search strategy, create a schedule. Don't wake up on Monday morning wondering, what am I going to do this week? Because it will be a very, very long week. Put a schedule together for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Put it into Excel and say, on Monday, I'm going to do LinkedIn. On Tuesday, I'm going to do Glassdoor. On Wednesday, I'm going to do XXX, whatever it is. And then keep that tally. When you apply somewhere, that 2 or 3 days later, you might follow up or figure out where that application sits. but keep that running spreadsheet going through the search. So one, it keeps you on track. Two, you see progress, right? You're going to need to see progress. You need to know that I woke up on Monday and I got 5 things done. Okay. Next slide, please, Brian. That'll be our final, I think. Perfect. Okay, and then take this time too to stay updated with news in your field. Register with relevant trade organizations. If you're in HR, there's SHRM, there's HR associations, there's virtual events. UNT and Brian's team puts together several career fairs that are virtual. So register and make sure that you're staying in touch with those. And if there are skills that you think you're behind on, like maybe Excel or PowerPoint, whatever, update those skills now. Now's the time we have this, and so that you're ready to jump out there. And then finally, step 6 is relax. Stay positive. Finding a job is a full-time job. No joke. It is. It's a really rough thing. However, stay positive because you're doing a great job doing it, and then reward yourself. Always don't feel guilty about rewarding yourself because that will keep you going as well. So those are the tips I had. I didn't know, did you want to open it to questions now, Brian, or did you want to wait till the end?
Yeah, no, well, I just, we can take questions.
Okay.
I'll show you, this slide is a whole listing of resources that we've developed during a lot of these during the last few months, especially this group down here. There are resources in Handshake itself, and Handshake is a fantastic resource for you. You're tied into a network of 800 other universities and students, and what that does is it attracts a lot of recruiters to us. So just would encourage you to take advantage of that. The careercenter.unt.edu is really great. Because the search box in there is really powerful, and so you can find a lot of information that we've put out there for you guys to access. And so with that, yeah, what questions do you have? If you want to put them in chat, you can put them in chat, or you can feel free, or you can activate your mic. Either way. Will this presentation be available following the session? Yes. It takes our staff in the Career Center. I'm gonna turn it over to them. They have to caption it for our general audience, so that probably around the middle of next week it'll be available, and it'll be available once again. The easiest place to find it probably will be right here where it says Career Center videos. But yeah, it'll be available. I want to let you know that in Handshake right now, the upcoming major recruiting events, they went live earlier this week. So you can look to see where there's going to be a virtual career fair. There are going to be some virtual networking events. You can sort of see when those are coming up. And because they are virtual, unlike in previous years where you could just come and walk up to the event and just kind of walk in, you do need to pre-register for these. And so I just want to make sure that I let you know about that. But we've already got employers who are signing up for our big career fair, which is at the end of September. What other questions? Could I talk a bit about unpaid internships and job shadowing? Yeah, great question. One of the the at least in the Ryan College of Business, the faculty does strongly encourage students to do paid internships. And the reason for that is most of the time students are doing work that brings value to the organization. However, there are sometimes opportunities for you to gain experience that you don't get paid for, and that's perfectly okay. But if you're wanting to get credit for it, and you're a business major, then it has to be paid. That's the university's or that's the college's policy. The job shadowing is very, very helpful. Just spend some time with somebody who does work you're interested in is very, very valuable, and we can help you with that in the Career Center. We also have some other resources, an online platform called Mean Green Mentors that we use, where you can contact, mostly it's UNT alumni that are in there. A few of them are recruiters. But that's another way for you to connect up with somebody who might be working in a field you're interested in and figure out a way to kind of job shadow them. Another thing, we have some resources, and we've sent out some information to some of your professors about it. There's such a thing as what's called a micro internship or work-related projects. And we have a couple of resources that we're working with right now to have students be able to go out at no cost to you, to be able to take on projects that are short-term, but where you can gain some valuable experience. And the good thing about all of these things is that if you're paying attention throughout the process of whatever it is, you can put that on a resume. You can put it on your profile on LinkedIn and in Handshake, particularly as it relates to skills you've gained through that experience.
Another thing I would add to that is there are, Brian and his team do an excellent job keeping or staying close to UNT alum. And if you are in Handshake, there are several alumni that come back and say, I'm now working at X company and we now have a job. We would be interested in hiring a UNT alum. So, it's very important that you do stay close to the Career Center and, Handshake for those very reasons, because there are a lot of solid contacts that they prefer UNT alum. So.
Yeah, and I would say at any given recruiting event that we have, it's historically been, it's kind of hard to know what the virtual is gonna look like, but about 50% of the recruiters or the people that are coming and attending those events on the recruiting side are UNT alumni. So most of the time you're going to have the opportunity to talk to somebody who is an alumnus, which hopefully increases your comfort level, and because they've been where you've been, they understand what it is to be a student at UNT, and so you've got that in common. Other questions? Yeah, we have a comment, and this is professional connections are key. I recently referred a student that one of our alumni sent me information about, and the person all had an interview within a week. And I think that's a great point. Whenever you get an internal referral in an organization, that is extremely powerful. About 60% of the time, you're going to get an interview if you get an internal referral. And so taking the time to build your network and develop those relationships has a big payoff. And I don't know of any other resource or anything else that you can do in the application process or whatever that's even close to having an internal referral for getting you to an interview. That statistic to me is way out ahead of pretty much anything else. Kathy, has that been your experience?
It has. And there is a statistic out there that basically says that 70% of the jobs that are available are not posted. So how do you think you're going to find those? It will be through your network. So it is highly, that's why your network becomes even more important, is some of those jobs that you're like, wow, I never even saw that job posted. Well, it was because it wasn't. So-and-so knew somebody that had an opening and then just gave that name. So make sure that you just you really keep your network really tight, because 70% will not be posted.
Let me also mention, and this is something I hope you spread the word to your your friends and students out there, and that is that even though it is a more challenging job market than it was 4 months ago, there are opportunities out there. There are jobs. Recruiters are recruiting, and so but a lot of it has to do with us being proactive, with us showing our grit, with us being resilient, and making sure that we're out there doing the things that we need to do to be successful. Any other questions?
I think you have another question out there.
Oh, I do? See? How hard is it for students and recent graduates to compete for jobs with professionals who have been terminated? Yeah, how can they differentiate themselves? Okay, well, I mean, just to elaborate on that just a little bit, that will be one of the challenges that you may have as a new graduate, is that you are going to be competing against people that maybe do have more experience than you have. You won't be able to control that. What you will be able to control is your preparation before you go into the interview. And I think that if you go into it and you're prepared, that's a differentiator, even with somebody who has experience, because sometimes those individuals go in and they have experience, they have skill sets, but maybe they're not very good at communicating that. And maybe you do a better job of showing that you were prepared. And so an employer might take that as, well, this person wants it more, right? Even though I might have to spend more time with you training you up, they don't really necessarily mind doing that. So, I think you just go into it being realistic that you may be competing against people who are more experienced than you, and maybe they do get the job, but still you do the best that you can. You be prepared, and you control what you can control.
And Brian, I actually have an example of that just happened last week. There was an individual from my network that reached out and said, hey, I'm looking for an HR person. I could hire an experienced person, but I really want to train them up in kind of our culture and our processes and everything. So I think what I want to do, and this was kind of on the HRS side, or on the information systems in HR side, and said, I will take a really go-getter that may or may not be virtually interested in a lot of HR, but if you can just get them in and they're willing to learn, then I'm ready to do it. So I had met somebody in the PLP program last year that I gave her name to this individual, and she's already interviewing with the CFO. Last week she had her interview, and she, so again, it kind of goes to, and she would have never expected that, because I talked with her like last year, and then out of the blue, she got a call because I had placed her or connected her with this other individual. So to your point, there are employers that want to train somebody versus just taking a ton of experience.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, again, you control what you can control, and you can't control who your competition is. So you do the best, and this is, a lot of times students will come to us and they're comparing themselves to other people, and okay, don't do that. You're an individual, you're you, so do what you do best, and sort of not worry about that part of it, because you couldn't control it even if you wanted to. Anything else? I just mentioned that, all of us in the Career Center, Kathy, we're available. All you have to do is reach out to us, email us. You can request appointments with the Career Center staff through Handshake right now. You know, so please, if we can help you out with anything, let us know, because that's what we're here for. Any final comments, Kathy?
No, I appreciate the time that you have given to us. I think we've got another question here.
Okay, many companies say job offers they're not willing to give sponsorship and prefer not to hire international students with an F1. How can I handle this situation? Well, the way you know I always answer that is that every student I know that's been successful in getting a job who is on an F1 visa has really done that through networking. You know, your networking, meeting people is the place where you show what value you potentially bring to the organization. And ultimately, having you know, somebody refer you or understand what it is that you're trying to do and what your capabilities are, that could have an impact. So that's my advice. I think you also maybe take advantage of some programs out there. A lot of students don't realize that there are what are called chambers of commerce. And those organizations, a lot of times those organizations are doing business development in other parts of the world, or helping individuals who want to do business, or businesses that want to do business, in our case in the DFW area. So it kind of runs both ways, but they're trying to help business or business people do business. And there are specific, there's a general, you know, DFW Chamber of Commerce, but there are chambers of commerce for, there's an Asian Chamber of Commerce, there's an Indian Chamber of Commerce. So if you're coming from one of those, you know, if your home country is in one of those areas, you might look to see if there is something like that. And you do have a somewhat of an advantage in the sense that you speak the language and you know the culture already. So by getting to know people who are also working in business development, sometimes that can lead to something. Finally, there are some resources out there. One of them is h1bvisa.com, and it just shows a list of organizations that have put people into the lottery for H1B. And unfortunately, there's no guarantee, and that resource doesn't tell you whether or not that person got a sponsorship or not, but at least you have an idea of companies that might be willing to do that. And you can look to see if they've got openings in your area, and go ahead and do the application, and maybe even find some networking contacts with those things. So those are 3 things that you can do.